Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. Because this is my show, of course, we're going to be breaking down the state of the polls in Canada on the eve of Canada's federal election. To put it in a nutshell for people who don't want to watch the entire video, the polls are very tight, but there are some very bright spots for the Conservatives. This is going to be a turnout election. Who can turn out their base more than the other party in the regions that matter? Now, the Conservatives have generally been trailing in the polls the entire election. At the same time, though, whenever you do confidence intervals, or like I'm about to show, whenever you ask people who's your neighbor voting for, the Conservatives are doing much better. I think that this election has the capacity to have one of the biggest national polling misses in Canadian political history because there is just so many pressures to not say you're voting Conservative, and the Conservative base has actually become very minority heavy, people who are very unlikely to take polls, and I don't think pollsters have properly adapted to this. Before I get into the polling details, I just want to remind you guys, if you like my show, if you've been liking my federal election coverage, make sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you're not yet a subscriber, help me get to 100,000 subscribers by mid-December of this year, and leave a comment with what you think or how you think the election is going to go. What do you think the popular vote percentage is going to be? What do you think the seat count is going to be between the Conservatives and the Liberals? I would say my prediction right now is that the Conservatives could win anywhere from 135 seats, which would obviously be a loss, up to around 165 seats. The Conservatives could win a majority. I just don't think the Liberals or Conservatives are going to win a majority. I think there is a 10% shot in this election that either of the parties pass the point where they have a majority government. I actually would think that the Liberals have a better chance at a majority, but again, we're talking about in a 10% shot, maybe it's a 6 out of that 10 for the Liberals compared to a 4 out of 10 for the Conservatives to win the majority. And again, same thing goes for the Liberals. I think they could lose a bunch of ridings and come in with only 130, or they could come in all the way up at like 167. But now let's get into some polls I've talked about before because they're going to flavor the other data we're going to go over today. And first up is the Juno News neighbor poll. Why I want to talk about this is when we get into other polls that are very tight, remember that this is how things tend to shake out when you ask a slightly different question. Juno News, in their final normal poll, just asking people, who are you voting for? It came down to 39 Liberal, 39 Conservative, and like 10 NDP. When you asked people, who's your neighbor going to vote for? Which tends to overcome the shy Tory effect, Conservatives not wanting to say they're voting Conservative or they're not picking up the phone, and also minority voters who are very unlikely to take a poll. This kind of overcomes it because you're asking someone in the community, well, who's the person next to you? You think, well, who do you think they're voting for? And right now, the Juno News poll had it at 40% Conservative, 38 Liberal, 11 NDP when you ask that question. And then Abacus Data, who their final poll has been +2 for the Liberal Party, when they asked people, who is your neighbor voting for? The results turned into Conservative Party 44%, Liberal Party 40, which is far better than the original result of 40 Conservative and 42 Liberal. So yes, I think that this is actually going to be very I think this is actually going to play out on election day. I do, if I am ballparking the chances for the Conservative minority government, I think it's a little bit better than a 50% chance for them. The thing that the Liberals have the advantage of is when you actually look at age demographics, it's just true that older voters tend to be more likely to vote Liberal. If you're an older voter and you're watching this video, obviously you're voting Conservative, but many boomer age people are voting Liberal, and they tend to turn out and vote more than younger voters. So we need very, very good middle-age turnout and youth turnout tomorrow, as well as it would be good for basically everyone to turn out, because if we can keep it tight with older voters, then we are in business because we have a very strong lead with people between the ages of 35 and 45 and 46 and 55. Those voters are very conservative. And so now I want to jump over to some other stats and some new polls that have just come out recently. Let's actually first start with this new poll from Innovative Research, who's kind of been a little bit all over the place in the last few days, but that's okay. It just happens with the sample sometimes. I think they generally do a good job. Sometimes they might just have a more liberal heavy sample one day. But they did specifically a poll of Chinese Canadian voters in British Columbia. And this is extremely encouraging information. This guy, Christie, says Innovative did polling of Chinese Canadians in BC specifically and their voting intentions linked below. And look at this. Conservatives are at 43% with Chinese Canadians in BC. Liberals are at 34%. That is fantastic news for the Conservatives because do you know how much Chinese Canadians voted for the Liberal Party back in 2021? They voted for the Liberals with a margin of about 13 to 15 points. So 15 points higher than what the Conservatives got is what the Liberals got with Chinese Canadian voters. In this election in BC, where the most CCP pressure would probably be on Chinese Canadians to vote Liberal, the Liberals are falling behind the Conservatives by 9 points. This is fantastic. And again, I could even see this being a bit of an undershoot for the Conservatives because if you're in the Chinese Canadian diaspora, do you want to admit that you're voting Conservative on the phone if you don't exactly know how polls and their data privacy works? Considering that you could have family back in China and the CCP might come after you and put pressure on you for voting Conservative. So this is fantastic. This specifically is going to free up a lot of ridings in BC for the Conservatives that they have not won in quite a while. Both Richmond ridings are in play. Delta is in play. Burnaby is definitely in play. My goodness, just Jagmeet Singh is going to lose his seat. This means in Ontario, if we assume the Chinese Canadian polling results in BC are going to be similar to Ontario, this means Markham is in play, Danforth, Richmond Hill, and many other smaller municipalities with significant Chinese Canadian populations. Some of them have pluralities, some of them in Richmond are actually majority Chinese or Asian Canadian. So that is fantastic, and this is also the big strength the Conservatives have going into Election Day. They have gotten new minority group voters who are very in favor of their programs on crime, on social issues, on economics, that are in concentrated areas where the Liberals usually won the ridings handily. I even have some personal experience in the riding of Nepean, where Mark Carney is running against the Conservative candidate Barbara Ball. Mark Carney, of course, kicked out Chandra Arya for that seat so that he could run in it, which actually has also ticked off a lot of Hindu Canadians in the riding who are not going to vote Liberal now. But there is this big section in the southwest of the riding of Nepean that is plurality or very at least significantly Chinese Canadian. And that riding, that part of the riding, that poll area, those several polls, went very, very liberal in the 2021 election. It's the reddest part of the riding. I have heard in this election that big southwest chunk of the riding is going blue, like deep blue, because Chinese Canadians, like many, but especially Chinese Canadians, hate the drug policies of the Liberals and they hate the crime policies of the Liberals. And it's been very beneficial that Barbara Ball has experience as a police officer with over 20 years on the force. So that is some good news there. And now let's move up to some other stats, some new polling that's just come out. This was an interesting thing that this Robert Benzie guy had posted just this morning, or actually last night. He had said, the Signal, the Toronto Star's polling aggregator, has been updated. April 26th has this race 40.8% Liberal, 40.1% Conservative, 8.8 NDP, 6.7 Bloc, 1.8 Green, 1.1 PPC. This is fantastic results for the Conservatives because if they are this close with the Liberals and the Bloc is at 6.7, it means the Liberals are getting a bunch of new votes in Quebec, but they're not winning any new seats, which means in the rest of the country, they're going to be well below 40% of the vote, probably around 36, 35%. Whereas the Conservatives who don't do that well in Quebec, although they do win seats in concentrated areas, they'll probably get 23, 24% Quebec, but they'll be at like 45% or 43% in the rest of the country. So if this is true, based on all the 338 simulators I've done, the Conservatives would be doing very well. Because again, remember that 6.7% of the bloc is all concentrated in Quebec, and 6.7% would result in them getting over 30% of the vote, which is enough to keep the Liberals boxed into Montreal and basically winning no new votes. Let's actually just quickly, just for the fun of it, plug all this stuff into the 338 simulator so I can show you what I mean here. I'm going to bring this back up. So it's 40.1 for the Conservatives. I'll actually just bring this up on screen so you guys can see it as I'm doing it. I don't want to keep you in the dark. So I have the Liberals at 40.8. The Conservatives are at 40.1. Let's move the NDP, as Robert has it, to 8.8, which is actually a little bit higher. They have the Greens, Toronto Star, at 1.8, so they get a decimal point higher. We have the Bloc at 6.7, and we have the PPC at 1.1. And there's still a margin of 0.7% of the vote that's not going to any of the major parties, and that's to be expected. There's always a bunch of independents that run. There's a bunch of other small minor parties like the Christian Heritage, Libertarians, Marxist-Leninists who get a smattering of votes here and there. So let's see what the results are with this seat projection. About what I had actually kind of expect from this election. 148 seats Liberal, 154 Conservative, 10 NDP, 1 Green, and 30 for the Bloc Québécois. So based on the polling projections of the Toronto Star as of yesterday, things are going quite well for the Conservatives. But now let's go over to the recent poll by David Coletto and Abacus Data, or Abacus Research, which has this as a very tight race, leaning a little bit Liberal. But remember, I just went over their neighbor polling. When the Liberals are 2 points up, when you ask people who their neighbor's voting for, the Conservatives are actually 4 points up. So this is how the course of the election has gone since late March. Start off with a slight Conservative lead. Liberals pulled ahead, Conservatives pulled ahead, Liberals pulled ahead, it tied, Liberals pulled ahead, and now it looks like basically we are back in that stage of the election where it's gonna the Conservatives are coming up and the Liberals are coming back down. So this is a big turnout election, as I keep saying. If the Conservatives can turn their people out in the places that matter, if minority voters show up for the Conservatives, like in the Chinese community in Richmond, in Markham, like with the Indo community, Hindu Canadians and Sikh Canadians in Brampton, in Mississauga, in Surrey, there is a very clear path to victory. The Conservatives already have some clear pickups they can get on Vancouver Island. They can get clear pickups in the southwest of Ontario. I think they're going to grab up a couple of seats in Ottawa. And if they can even keep it tight, even keep it within 10 points of the Liberals winning. So if the Liberals win Atlantic Canada by 10 points, that's actually not a good result for the Liberals because they want to win Atlantic Canada by like 15 points, 17 points. If it comes within 10, that means rural Maritimes probably are going Conservative. So yeah, right now, I would just encourage all of you, make sure you go out and vote. Let's look at some of these results that have come, some of the detailed results. I think this is kind of interesting. Central argument for the Conservatives, when you ask Conservative voters or you ask voters in general, what is the Conservatives' message? It's actually a little bit all over the place, but not in a bad way. It's all about reform, about economic prosperity, about freedom, all that sort of thing. But when you ask Liberal voters and Conservatives what the Liberal campaign's all about, it's only about Trump. I find that so sad in an election that should be taken seriously, that there are people in this country who will vote because they think it might make Donald Trump upset. If you're a Liberal out there, it's not going to make Donald Trump cry if you vote for Mark Carney. He, in fact, endorsed the Liberal Party not once, not twice, but thrice. So why are you voting for the party that Donald Trump would rather deal with? It's almost like he's indicating they're pathetic and he can get a better trade deal out of them. Carney can't even keep straight what Trump says on the phone because he keeps flip-flopping whether he was respectful or he was disrespectful, depending on how his polls are going that day. It's silly. It's maddening. Now I just want to jump up to the preferred prime minister polls as well. Actually, no, let's go to the accessible voters, actually preferred prime minister. This is the one that's actually gotten quite tight since the beginning. Poilievre has always been trailing in this metric, but you saw in the middle of the race, Carney take a very big lead, at one point leading Poilievre on the preferred prime minister rating by 9 points. Now they're within 3. And remember, you're always going to get a bunch of Bloc and NDP voters saying, oh, of course I prefer Carney, because they know their guy's not actually going to become the prime minister. So they'll pick the next best thing if you're on the left, which would be Mark Carney. And so the fact that Poilievre is that close is a very, very good result for him. Now, there's just one more thing I want to talk about, and that is the accessible voter pools, because it is quite good for the Conservatives. Here are accessible voters between the two parties from, this is November 15 all the way up till now. So in November of 2015, shortly after Justin Trudeau was elected, the Liberals had 70% of people willing to consider voting for them, only 42 for the Conservatives. But now let's jump ahead to December, at the mid-December, when Justin Trudeau was in trouble. The Liberals dipped their accessible voter pool all the way down to only 36%, and the Conservatives were at 52, and by the next week they were at 55. Since then, obviously, the Liberals had a big rocketing up effect because Trudeau stepped down and there's a leadership race and the Liberals get to pretend they're any different. But as you'll see, it then starts to fall back down to earth as more people realize the Liberals have not changed. The funny thing is you take December's numbers for the Conservatives and you go to now, the Conservatives' accessible voter pool has not changed. Despite all of the rhetoric that people do not like Pierre Poilievre and they can't vote for him, still half of Canadians are considering voting for them. And remember, the Liberals always tend to have the advantage on accessible voter pools because they have the Greens and the Liberals and the Bloc who are more ideologically similar to them. So naturally, those voters are more likely to say they'll consider voting Liberal compared to Canadians on the right. And even some Conservatives will consider voting Liberal if they're particularly middle-of-the-road red Tory. So yeah, all this is looking quite good for the Conservatives. I will remind you guys, if you're thinking about voting for the PPC, because I'm going to stick it to the system, the PPC aren't even running candidates in over 2/3 of the ridings. So if you live in a riding and there's no PPC candidate, guys, vote Conservative. Because you can't say, well, Poilievre would have messed up anyways if he was Prime Minister. Let him be Prime Minister so that you can prove us wrong. Because even if you think he's still not good enough for you, is he better than Mark Carney and Trudeau? Because you're never going to find utopia in the electoral system. You're never going to find the perfect candidate. In fact, Maxime Bernier isn't even trying. So if you're voting PPC, my goodness, you're voting for a guy who takes your donations, doesn't actually campaign hard, literally sits in his hotel rooms most of the time, and just because he has good things to post on the website, you're going to support him instead. I guess more power to you if you want to do that. It's kind of a serious election, and I would say this to anyone considering voting for the Libertarians or the Christian Heritage Party or some sort of Freedom Party or the United Party of Canada. You're not doing anything here. You're voting for people who aren't actually building anything. I don't even mind small parties. I support small parties in other elections. Like in Ontario, I support the New Blue Party. I even flew out on my own expense to help them. Paid for my own flight, my own hotel room, my own food. And then I got a lift from people to drive around dropping lid on doors and talking to people because I support small parties when they're trying to build something real and when they're opposed to conservative alternatives who are just not good. Like Doug Ford's just not conservative. There's no argument for him being really any better than the Liberals. Truly, it's not, you don't have to be hyperbolic to make that case, where I find the PPC guys constantly have to delve into hyperbole, frankly twisting the truth and just making up stuff about Poilievre that isn't true. Oh, he's WEF. His name was once on the website. Yeah, because they syndicated an article he wrote for the Financial Post one time because the WEF likes to do that so they can put people's bios on their website as if they have an association. The WEF is a pathetic grifter organization who will try and use people's good names that they never lent to them. Anyway, so that should be it for me today, guys. Vote. That is the only message of the day. Vote. If you have younger kids who are not voting, make them vote. Get them to show up and vote. If you're going to go and drive out to the polling station and you're not sure if a family member's going to go on their own, make sure you bring them with you. So that's it for me today, guys. Thank you for watching the show. Thank you for subscribing, doing all that great stuff. And I will be back later with another video.